The 2018 runoffs are today. Want a little inside information on today's election? In this Mitchell Talks episode, Sooner Poll's CEO Bill Shapard tells us who he thinks will win and why. Then tonight, Bill Shapard and I join News 9 and News9.com for election coverage with Kelly Ogle and Amanda Taylor and the whole News 9 team for returns and analysis. But right now it's Bill Shapard, CEO of Sooner Poll, on Mitchell Talks, the Runoffs.
You're listening to the new media. You're listening to Mitchell Talks. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter at MitchellTalks.
Everybody wants to know what Bill Shapard knows in our election today. So let's start with the high-profile races, and let's go get into the weeds a little bit. By the way, great appearance on Hot Seat Saturday on News 9.
Thanks.
So let's start with what we did on Hot Seat, which is the governor's race. That's the one everybody's talking about, probably to the detriment of some of the other races in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. But it is the GOP today, Mick Cornett versus Kevin Stitt. Tell us what you can tell us about what you know about this race.
Well, first of all, I want to first tip my hat to Mick Cornett because I think he did a very good job in the primary. He got a lot of the rural areas in and around Oklahoma City, even winning Garfield County all the way up to where Todd Lamb was originally from and winning that county by 73 votes. You know, that is quite a feat for a former Oklahoma City mayor. If we look back into political history, no former Oklahoma City mayor has done that well in the rural areas. Now, that being said, when we look here at the runoff, we have to look at he's got to win other rural parts of the state. He's got to win Lawton. He's got to win Ardmore, Ada, McAllister, Muskogee. Those are not in the Oklahoma City viewing area. And so these people are going to look at Mick Cornett as not someone that they have paid attention to for the last 14 years as mayor of Oklahoma City, but as all they know about him is that he's a former mayor of Oklahoma City. And in all honesty, that is not a good moniker to have when trying to woo those votes in rural areas. So if this was true, then Kirk Humphreys would be a U.S. Senator today. And so we have to understand that there is a built-in bias to Oklahoma City because they think the Oklahoma City mayor runs the city and Oklahoma City runs everything anyway. So we need to look for other places for the head of our state. You know, keep in mind, I mean, look at it this way. I mean, all of the statewides, Tom Coburn was from Muskogee. Nichols was from Ponca City. Mary Fallon was originally from Seminole. Brad Henry from Shawnee. In most cases, the rural candidate was the compromise candidate between Oklahoma City and Tulsa because they couldn't agree. This race is completely different than we have seen in most recent political history, which is we have an Oklahoma City and run against a Tulsa, and now the rural areas are going to make more of a decision. And mind you, on Sooner Poll, we've done some analysis that goes back and shows that the Republican registration growth in the rural areas indicates to us that the primary voter, those that will be voting tomorrow in the Republican primary, more of those in rural areas now than are in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. Now, keep in mind, we throw in counties like Canadian County and Cleveland County into those areas, but keep in mind that's the change of the Republican Party. It's changed over 20 years, and we're going to see that impact tomorrow.
It's interesting to note we have now a Senate Pro Tem who's from Oklahoma City, Edmond. Think about leadership in Oklahoma. Think about since Republicans took over, look at all the towns where the speakers are from and where the Pro Tems have been from. It really does default to the rural areas. You made an interesting statement, which is he overperformed, talking about Mr. Cornett. The questions people are still asking is, what happened to Todd Lamb? So did Mick Cornett overperform that night, or did the lieutenant governor underperform in the rural areas? I
think it's maybe a little combination of both. You know, Todd Lamb suffered from one being the lieutenant governor in a year where the chaos that we've had down at the state capitol, the teacher strike, not having a balanced budget by Sendai of the year before. I mean, special sessions. This doesn't bode well for those that are currently leading the state. That's why we see Mary Fallon's unfavorable is the highest it's ever been. We find it competing with David Walters from the 1990s, who was appearing late night in court over corruption charges, mind you. So not that Mary Fallon's done anything like that, but the point is that her unfavorables are that high. Now, that being said, I think that Todd Lamb, though, made a strategic miscalculation. He thought that by staying away from the problems, that somehow that none of that would stick to him. And quite frankly, in times of stress and trouble, people are looking for leadership, and they didn't get it out of him. And so he couldn't then run on a platform that I can fix this. If he had been down there, engaged, even though it didn't come out to favorable for him, for the most part, they would have seen him trying to lead. And I thought that was his best card to play, and he decided not to play it at all.
Where will the Lamb voters go?
The rural Lamb voters, in my opinion, who have not been exposed to Mick Cornett, will probably go towards Kevin Stitt. Keep in mind, among Republican primary voters, 2-1, they're looking for an outsider. And Kevin Stitt has played that card very, very well so far in this campaign. So if they're looking for an outsider, if the state capitol looks like chaos, that plays well into Stitt, and those rural voters will probably go towards him.
So you started off by talking about Mr. Cornett. What are Mr. Stitt's, what are his strengths? What does he bring to the table for the election today?
Well, one, I think his middle name has been outsider for the past 9 months, and again, like I said, I think he's done that very well. That's what the voters are looking for. His strength, probably going into a general election, is that he has no history. I mean, I think Drew Edmondson was looking very, very good at running against somebody who is the incumbent party. Maybe Mick Cornett wasn't part of the state capitol mess, but he's still a career politician for the most part, and that would have something he can run against. He can't run against Kevin Stitt that way. I mean, Kevin Stitt's going to come in, and I'm a businessman. You're more the career politician than I am. You're the reason why we have this problem. In fact, it could almost, the tables be turned. We show the polling right now as far as matchups between Mr. Cornett and Mr. Edmondson, and then also Mr. Stitt and Mr. Edmondson, as where Mick Cornett's leading by about 8 points, whereas Stitt and Edmondson are literally neck and neck within. Now, people have derived from that. Oh well, it looks like Mick Cornett's the best Republican candidate, and Cornett wouldn't have a chance. First of all, it's this close because Oklahomans are beginning to question that Republicans can really run state government. We see this because we look at the congressional generic ballot, where Republicans have a 25-point lead on Democrats, something like 53-27, something in that neighborhood. That is substantial. That's sizable, but it's the high watermark for Republicans. But when it comes to looking at the governor's matchups, it drops to literally maybe 8 points, 5 points, down to 0. And what does that mean? That means that they're beginning to question, I don't know if Republicans can run state government. So we're going to have a very interesting general election regardless of who the Republican is.
What you're saying is, if I'm clear on this, is that Mr. Edmondson would be hoping to run against Mr. Stitt, not Mr. Cornett.
Well, right now it looks that way. But I think as the campaign develops, he'll probably wish he was running against Cornett. But anyway, it certainly he would have rather had Todd Lamb to run against.
So tonight, when we're doing election coverage, and people are going to be looking at the returns, very few Republicans are going into the booth today going, I'm going to select this Republican because he can do better against former Attorney General Edmondson. People don't think like that.
They don't. They don't think like that. They don't think of the next race. They're just thinking about who they think is the best candidate. And a lot of that is driven by likability because of maybe low information. It could be driven by their ideological perspective. I mean, keep in mind, Stitt has the advantage tonight because he's seen as the more conservative of the two, and we know that Republican runoff voters are much more conservative than the population overall. As I said earlier, the rural vote's going to play a significant role in this deciding factor, and so I think right now Kevin Stitt has the advantage by a lot of things going in. But again, Mick Cornett could surprise us.
Second on the ballot, and I've already voted, by the way. My hats off to Oklahoma County Election Board. They are so efficient in that early voting. I love that.
Yeah, on Lincoln, great folks. Just
amazing how they handle these things. All right, so right down the ballot is right after the governor is lieutenant governor. Now, this seems to be the race that I'm not sure the media knows there's a race there.
Yeah, it's pretty undefined. But then again, even the office itself is pretty undefined. And that's the reason why we're going to vote in November on whether we should marry together the governor and lieutenant governor and let them run as a ticket. Think of what's happened over the last year. A lot of the oxygen has been sucked out of the room by the talks of budget deficits and teacher strikes. Then we pivoted right from there to medical marijuana. And so if you're a down-ticket race, you're suffering first and foremost from just a lack of attention being applied to you. It's amazing that since we have so much more places to get news, that you would think we would have more news on all of these races. And it seems to me like it's almost been the opposite. And another thing that I think is worth noting is that keep in mind that 10, 20 years ago when candidates said, hey, if you're going to get in that race, you got to get in by Labor Day, right? Well, they may be getting in by Labor Day, but nobody's spending $1 campaigning until April, it seems. So it's having an impact on us as a pollster is because what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do candidates start spending money and campaigning, and then we begin to see the numbers move in the polling? And then that way we don't have 50, 60% undecided in some of these ballots? Or is it that candidates are waiting less because they don't think people are paying attention and they want to be able to use up all their bullets in the closing weeks and be able to win the thing? So polling is suffering from high undecideds, and it's, I think, due in large part to either people are not paying attention earlier on or the candidates are not expending money earlier on.
Sounds to me like you're not a fan of media coverage of the down ballot races.
There's been very little except here in the closing days, and I don't really feel like that has been as in-depth as it possibly could. We have a lot of alternative media that are stepping up and having debates and having more to write on, putting these candidates together and getting them to tell us how they feel about the issues. I mean, how else can voters make a decision over who they're going to select unless they're given more opportunities to read about them or to see them in action in a debate? And so I tip my hat to more of the alternative medium, the blogs, the podcasts like this, many different opportunities that people have to hear more about the campaigns.
The irony of watching the old legacy media attending debates sponsored by, say, for example, Trey Savage over at Non-Dog, you just cannot miss the irony in how digital is really, really accentuating the decline of the old legacy. Then comes Attorney General,
right,
which has been highly reported on, high profile, and has been very, very it's been an aggressive race on both sides. Your analysis of what's happening there today?
Well, our first poll on that showed that Mike Hunter, the incumbent, was in the single digits. And so not a place that I think any incumbent would want to be. Now, keep in mind, we say incumbent. He was appointed. He was never on the ballot. He hadn't been on the ballot in over 20 years, which is a lifetime in politics. So that being said, he's still the incumbent in the race. And I think when Drummond got in, he caught him flat-footed. And so he's had to fight back hard. What I think is interesting is that I think that the campaign that Gettner has played has been one of build up my positives as a Navy pilot and then quickly pivot from that to attacking Mike Hunter. And I think he pivoted too fast because in that pivot of negative campaigning, particularly in a multi-candidate field in the primary, it pushed a lot of the votes that he would have naturally probably gotten to a third candidate. Now, when we go to a runoff, it's still now two fellas. But he has not built, I don't think he built up his positives enough in which to sustain the self-inflicted impact that comes from negative campaigning. Yes, you drive down the vote of your opponent, but you also hemorrhage some as well. And so that's where you rely then on your positive that you've built up over that course of time in which to sustain you through that process. So that being said, I think that, and keep in mind, Mike Hunter has a lot of things that can negatively be said about him. I mean, he's hired law firms to represent the state in opioid lawsuits, and then those guys turned around and gave him campaign dollars. Now, they could have easily given it, but he could have easily declined it. the mere fact that he accepted it, I think he should have been saying, no, I'm not going to accept that. I didn't pick you for that reason. But you see what it looks like in a campaign. Whereas if you're Gettner Drummond, you look at that and go, man, I can win on that issue. And he went really, really hard on it. And I think that that's part of the problem of running such a severe negative campaign, is that in all honesty, while you may be telling the truth and it may be effective as a message, the way you present it can turn people off. And I think that's what's happened.
It's another one of those races where the media is hyper-focused on that aspect of the suit, but really didn't get into the fact that cities and counties are not down with the way this thing's being set up. Completely missed the mark on that.
That's right.
Do you have you think there's a favorite there today in terms of what you're looking at?
You know, I'm going to say that of all the races, this is my coin toss, because I can see a way to victory for Mike Hunter. He's ahead. Gettner Drummond has been slightly behind, not only in the primary, but also so far leading up till today. However, Mike Hunter still has not gotten to 50% or anywhere close to that at this point, which is where you want to be as an incumbent. Now, keep in mind, statistics show us that in runoffs, incumbents only win 56% of the time. It is more than the majority of the time they win, but it's awful close.
Is that what pollsters call within the margin of error or something like that? Well, you guys do a lot of math.
That's right.
All right, so let's keep on going down ballot. Corporation Commission. Now, Mr. Bingman's been all over the place. Mr. Anthony he's doing everything he can not to appear in public with Mr. Bingman.
Right.
Generally, doesn't that mean you're ahead?
Well, he is ahead. We've seen that he's got 47% of the vote. He's 3 points away from a majority of even winning that in the primary. And so I feel like that Anthony is playing the strong incumbent race. He doesn't necessarily need to engage in debates. Keep in mind, 20, 30 years ago, we didn't have these kinds of debates down ticket for challengers. And there's no rule that says that you have to. Now, obviously, for us as media types, we'd love to have it. But keep in mind that there's a lot of people out there who just get up every day, take their kids to school, go to work, come home, eat dinner. They're less engaged in with the political process, but their vote still counts just as much as everybody else's. And so, while Anthony's got 30 years of honesty and integrity built into his entire campaign, he's going to run on that, and we'll see what happens. But no doubt that Brian Bingman has run a race that has been admirable in the aspect of trying to be at a 30-year incumbent. I know he travels around the state and says that's what the most people don't want, but Jim Inhofe has been down there almost 30 years. I think Don Nichols had been there 20, 25 years. It's not like that's something as Oklahomans that we somehow tend to shy away from. We're a small state, so when we send people to usually federal office, we want them for a while to build up that seniority. There's no doubt that Anthony's got this persona as the defender of the ratepayer, and that has boded well for him.
Advantage Anthony in that race?
I think so.
We'll get back on that's Corporation Commission. Let's moving down the ballot. Let's look at Superintendent of Public Instruction.
Yeah,
Ms. Hoffmeister, Ms. Murphy. She's run before. Ms. Hoffmeister has been there. She had it's been an interesting first term.
Without a doubt.
Ms. Hoffmeister just barely missed taking it all in the primary. Your thoughts about that race?
Well, and that's what's so amazing about this race. I mean, Joy Hoffmeister in the last 4 years has been through something that most candidates literally would cringe at having to go through. What was it, a near indictment? Is that right?
She was indicted.
She was indicted. It never was carried through.
And then they were dismissed.
She a teacher strike. You would think that she would be the focal point of a lot of frustrations that are felt within education among teachers, and then also with these charges that were dismissed. Look, she's a survivor. I mean, I literally look like she's a cat that's been thrown up in the air and she's landed on her feet. And I think that, for her to be as close to 50% as she was in the primary shows that Republicans are willing to stick with her. Now, I definitely think it's advantage her going in. Not to say that Linda Murphy is not a good candidate. She's got a vast experience of having been Secretary of Education under Keating. She's a well-qualified candidate. But Joy's ability here to campaign and close is there ought to be a chapter in political science on that particular race, I think.
Advantage Hoffmeister.
Advantage Hoffmeister.
Labor. That's been an interesting race. We Oklahomans know the story, the tragic story of Kathy Costello. Mm-hmm. Mark Costello is one of the most interesting people I ever met or interviewed. Mm-hmm. Now, that particular situation she's an outsider, but she's sort of running as an insider, and she does her opponent, Representative Osborn, former A&B chief. Mm-hmm. She was no longer A&B chief. She challenged the party hierarchy, sort of a maverick type of person.
Right.
That particular race in the last few days, the media completely didn't look at that one, and now it looks like it's being defined by TV ads and media at the end. Your analysis of the Osborn versus Costello race.
Yeah, Leslie Osborn is a good candidate. I think her maverick style, plays well to a Republican runoff voter. But it is difficult to run against widows. She's a lot of her experience is built in the mental health field. Not a lot that necessarily deals with labor, but I don't think that makes her any less qualified as a candidate. I think that she definitely has the advantage in this race. But yeah,
she being
Kathy Costello. But I think that down ticket races are more easily affected by money because, again, low information. Some of these races, Scott, will literally boil down to name ID. Oh, I know something about her, or I know something about him. And that'll make the decision for them in most cases. And so name recognition, name ID, name association. I mean, Kathy Costello's doing the same radio ads that her husband did. I mean, we have to look back into political history. This is why jingles have done so well. Edmondson had a jingle, right? Costello had one. I mean, Brian Bingman's even trying with a jingle on Bingman, right? I mean, these things help. And so why do they? It's because it's not negative campaigning. It's building name recognition, name ID, and that helps when you get to the ballot box.
Do negative ads still work, or definition ads, or however comparison ads, some people like to say? Do they work late in a campaign?
Absolutely. Negative campaigning will always be used by candidates as long as, at the end of the day, if the candidate that went most negative wins, then they will derive from that negative campaigning is still an effective campaign tool. Can you go too far with it? Yes, and I think we're seeing that a little bit in the Gettner-Drummond race. Can it be used effectively? I think that it's, like, for instance, in the governor's race, been used very effectively, where you can then say, I'm being attacked. I must define myself, or I must not let my opponent define, and then they come out with this compare and contrast. Is that really negative? I don't know, but the point is that it's certainly a way to lessen the negative. If we talk for a minute a little bit about, like, the Bull Stitt idea that Mick Cornett is running with, I certainly hope he tested that before running with it, because the Republican runoff voter, I think, is going to be older. They're going to have seen all of the strings before. It's not their first rodeo, okay? And so they're looking at that and going, is that a word that I'd want my grandchild to use? And when it comes back and, no, I don't think that would, then why would you want your next governor to use it? So it might be used privately by them, and even the candidates might use the word privately. But going public with that, I think some voters are going to have a problem with that. Certainly that he's gone public with it, he feels strong enough to go with it that it'll help him more than hurt him. But again, we'll find out today.
You mentioned that it's very difficult to run against a widow with that sort of story, with somebody who's encountered enough tragedy for 20 lifetimes.
Right.
The Osborn ad at the end has been very, very detailed about, which some people call it attack, some people call it comparison and contrast. Yet
Right.
there's no media to really get into deciding whether or not the what are claims in Representative Osborn's ad are true or false. I mean, it's just completely underneath the media radar.
Yeah.
Why do you think they're so reluctant to get into a race like that? We're going to have people going to the polls today voting on labor commissioner, and it's going to be basically stuff they've seen on TV and not much press, not much First Amendment involvement.
Well, the press and the First Amendment is typically defined as to be there to provide equality, to truth test what's being said. And, sometimes if a lie is said and it's said enough, it becomes truth, right? So the point is that we need to be there, I think, as the media to do that. I've had this kind of issue right now in the first congressional race in Tulsa. Put out a poll. The other side didn't, not an independent, nonpartisan poll. The candidate was down, didn't like the results, came out with his own poll, but would not release the results. I've tried to hold that campaign and that candidate accountable for releasing the details behind your poll so we can look at it. There is minimum disclosure requirements that Sooner Poll not only meets, but in many times exceeds. And I expect other campaigns, if they were release partisan polls, to do that as well. Look, the media has a responsibility to hold the candidates accountable for what they say and what they do, and also what they do in their comparison ads or their negative campaigning, et cetera. We have to do that because, again, then we are just allowing lies to become truth over the course of time.
One of the interesting facts that you had talked about earlier is that some folks are just avoiding trying to get out there in the press because they're probably ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Right.
Let's talk about the auditor inspector's race.
Right.
This has turned into Gary Jones versus Charles Prater. I'm not sure of how smart it is for Mr. Jones to continue to insert himself in the last few days of a campaign. Allows Mr. Prater to respond. This has become very, very ugly, and part of it is we've watched the legislature defund that office over the past few years, and now they've created this commission, which looks like a way to replace the auditor's inspector's office. Ms. Byrd is Jones's legacy. If she's elected, I haven't seen her distance herself at all from Gary Jones. Your analysis of where the insider is taking a very high-profile stance trying to elect his successor and what is going on with he and Mr. Prater.
Yeah. I guess you ask yourself the question, if a former office holder who's term limited has pretty much been successful, and I think you would probably agree that Gary Jones' tenure has been pretty successful as state auditor. How do you run for an office as basically an outsider, as Mr. Prater is? How do you run for that without criticizing that, hey, it's broken, and I got to come along and fix it? Plenty. Obviously, that can be done for governor right now, right? But can it really be done for state auditor? I'm not so sure of that. And so I think, in all honesty, Mr. Prater has made a mistake by trying to try to attack the current incumbent as having not done a good job, which I think is a little bit harder sell than maybe at the governor level and lack of leadership there, given everything that's happened. And so that's what's brought Gary Jones into it. Now, is it unprecedented? Yeah, I can't think of a race where the former incumbent came in to basically defend his record in a way that also helps his former or current lieutenant current lieutenant try to win the seat. I think that we're going to see what kind of impact that makes. But at this time, yeah, there's a lot of things going on with auditing, performance audits. We got governor's candidates saying that we need to audit everything. I mean, transparency in government is very important, and I think that the state auditor's office has been a little reduced a little bit in its stature, but I think it's still something. It's going to be hard to run against the incumbent and win. And I think Prater picked that fight and probably should not have done it. There's other things to run on. Drain the swamp. We just need we need new people, fresh set of eyes, all different kinds of things that I think could have been done. That could have been a better way in which to run in that particular race.
It does seem, once again, where the media missed an opportunity. The one thing that I think that the media has gone under the screen, and I don't know if what they're doing on the campaign trail, the question about why did the state auditor miss $30 million at the State Department of Health? That was a big issue, and it's not being talked about.
No, it's not. And yes, that can be a mistake that I think can be looked at. You know, I'm not an accountant, so I mean, I don't know how those things happen or whatever, and we want to take any report that comes out at its face value. But certainly it was suddenly a problem. Then all of a sudden it was a non-problem, and but then having it been a problem caused a whole bunch of other problems once we found out it was a non-problem. And so I thought it was going to be more of an issue in this race, and it really has not been. I don't know. We'd have to see how the voters decide on it today. I don't know if there's anything more I can say. As a pollster, I could say it's pretty unprecedented to see a incumbent get that engaged in the election of his assistant or his lieutenant for his term-limited office.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating to be in the weeds with you. We tried to do this discussion Saturday morning in 4 minutes. Mm-hmm. So we're at 30 minutes now.
Yeah,
and I'm still not done asking.
And I love this better. I love this format better. Trends as far as what we're going to look at tonight. We're going to look at these other 7 House seats, Republican House seats that are up for re-election, and to see how they perform tonight. Again, incumbents don't perform very well. Only 56% of the time do they win. We're going to find out tonight how many of those 7. We know 1's won, 2 have lost. But the reason why we're tracking these is it gives us an indication of just how much people are willing to throw out the incumbents or the ruling party, because this lays the groundwork for what we're going to look at moving forward in the general election. Here at Sooner Poll, we also have some other polling where we ask voters about a variety of different attributes. For instance, like we say, I'm going to read you a list of attributes for each one. Please tell me which party, Republican or Democrat, or the legislators of that party do a better job of that particular attribute. The first one, running state government, right? Republicans have performed very well. They've been on the downward slope here over the last year. It'd be interesting to see where they are as we move into the general election.
Why are they sliding in terms of confidence from voters on running state government?
Well, to run state government, sometimes you have to overcome things that may be within your own ideology, like, say, not voting for any tax increases, in which to first govern before assuming that you should follow your ideology to some sort of strict direction. I think that that's the mistake that the Republicans have made. Now, it's been pointed out many times that a higher percentage of Republicans, for instance, in the step up back in February, voted for it than Democrats did. Democrats have been late to come to joining the party and getting this stuff passed and meeting the high threshold that we have for raising taxes. But they played that card well as far as creating a teacher strike issue, and that going all the way until 60 days before the primary election. I will tell you, though, that I think a little bit of that gun got turned on Democrats as well, because when I ask this running state government attribute and which party do you think is best, yes, Republicans have gone down, but guess what? The Democrats did not necessarily go up. What went up was people said neither party is good at doing that. So again, the Democrats suffered a little bit from it. They got a little bit of shrapnel on themselves exploding the bomb. Definitely hurt Republicans, but they got hit as well. So we'll see moving into the general election how much that plays a role in that. But I think that voters' views of who's best to run government, who's best to fund K through 12 education, who's best to decide on taxation, what's to tax and how much to tax. These are the issues that move us forward into a general election and will tell us as bellwethers whether they're going to try to completely change Republican ruling at this time, which is what we have, or they're going to then vote more Democrat.
So in your world, what we saw over the last 18 months, I think, with all due respect, the executive branch really was out to lunch in terms of the big battles that were at the legislature. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely fair to say. You can see it in her favorability ratings, and since they are so low. In fact, the lack of leadership at the top is probably what created more of the mess to begin with.
So with the installation of a strong personality in the governor's office, a different personality, obviously, could the GOP gain more respect with legislators, or with the public rather, if they are? Do Republicans do best whenever that they're the loyal opposition?
No, I don't think that they do.
Even if it's their person.
At the state level and the federal level, Republicans have been more of the minority in throwing rocks and saying, hey, we could do better than that. Now they finally got to do better. And not all of it all is they're doing. There were a lot of legacy problems that continued through this small tenure of Republican majority. So I don't want to say, oh, this is complete evidence that shows that Republicans can't govern, because they've fixed a lot of the pension problems, right? They've cut government down to probably where there's, are we cutting into the bone, or have we cut all of the fat? They've at least done some. Democrats tend to not do any of that at all in most cases. And so the public is hungry for that. They're hungry for a lean government. But do they want then for teachers to go out without a pay raise for 10 years? No. Do they want us to go multiple special sessions and not balance the budget? No. So there's a fine balance here for Republicans to say, or to show the public, we can govern. Give us more time on the clock to show that we can govern and fix some of these legacy problems. Whereas the Democrats could come along and say, they've had their chance, they couldn't do it, put us in, and we'll make sure that government can run and keep the trains running on time. And that's what I think we're going to be talking a lot about between today and Election Day in November.
One of Trey Savage's stories this week, he interviewed Representative Josh West about what's happening inside of the caucus in those House races. Mm-hmm. A lot of the folks that were strictly anti-tax are in runoffs. Mm-hmm. When the dust clears tonight, if a lot of the incumbents that were no on the tax increases have won, what does that mean?
Well, if they've won, then they will at least try to claim victory that they did the right thing according to their own political party.
And if they get pushed out?
If they get pushed out, not only are the Democrats would probably not vote for them in that particular case, but now we found that their own party wouldn't support them, because that's what we have today. We have a partisan runoff today. They are before their own voters and having to substantiate, I voted against it. I'm a no new tax guy, and I don't care if we still had the problem, but I do it again. They have to then look at their Republican voters and say, but we can still govern. I just don't think how you can say that. How could you govern when your ideology comes first? I don't think that, and I think this is where they've lost connection with the traditional Republican voter that we talk to on a daily basis as voters. I have a ton of Republicans that tell me that teachers should make more money. I have a ton of Republican voters who say that we need to raise taxes in which to fix this problem. Keep in mind, when I asked my last poll back in February about this issue, I asked them, do you think taxes are too high, too low, or about right? A plurality, 43% said taxes are too high. Then I read them the problem, tell them about the step up, which includes, for example, tax increases. And guess what? 2 out of 3 of those people who said that taxes were too high said they supported it. So it tells me that even Republicans within their DNA is not this ideological rigidity that says we cannot raise taxes. We must govern first, fix the problem, then we can come back and cut taxes when we think that it's the right thing to do. And this is the disconnect between those Republicans and their elected officials right now.
10,000-foot level tonight, what are you looking for that the press is probably going to miss?
Gosh, that's a big question right now. I know we're going to be watching these other 7 races. I want to see how Mick Cornett does in the rural areas outside of the Oklahoma City viewing area, because I think that'll be the tall test of who will win that race. I'm going to be looking at turnout, because I've done a little bit of analysis over the weekend, just looking at the absentees and the early voting. And right now we're at about a 25% turnout. Keep in mind we were 43 for the primary, which was high. I've been doing all of my estimates in the low 30s. and right now we're about 25%. So now keep in mind, we've been as low as 15% for some runoffs, but we got a lot more on the ballot this time. It almost feels like today is more like a primary than a runoff. Wouldn't you say, Scott?
It has that feel to it,
yeah.
Especially since we used to have these in August in Oklahoma. You used to have the primaries in August.
That's right. Other states are having theirs as well. We lengthened that out in which to give us more time. It's a very incumbent advantage when you have a shortened campaign season because it doesn't give the opposition enough time. So I thought it was a good idea to move it to June. But now we have the runoffs in August. I still feel like it feels more like a primary today than anything. So I think turnout will be important to look at because instead of it just being the far right voting in a lot of these Republican runoffs, we'll have a little bit more of the less, somewhat conservatives and the moderates voting, and that will have an impact on a lot of these races.
Some of these legislative races, they're in runoffs in some of these districts. Is that favor Mr. Stitt or Mr. Cornett? Because they're going to be doing more get out the vote there, right?
I think it depends upon where it is. If it's in Oklahoma City, I think it's advantage Cornett. If it's in Tulsa or some of the rural areas outside of the Oklahoma City viewing area, I think it's advantage Stitt. So, keep in mind, look at Tulsa. It has a Republican runoff for its congressional seat. That's advantage Stitt because both of those campaigns will be pushing people out. And I know Mitt Cornett has made a strong play for Tulsa. That to him was fruit at the top of the tree and hardest to get to. And instead of that being his Achilles heel by the time we finally get to Election Day, I think it was smart for him to go up there and to campaign and be aggressive and work in the backyard of your opposition. However, keep in mind, where has he been a lot? A lot of rural areas. I think here in just the past weekend, he was out to Woodward. He knows that he's got to do well in the rural areas. Stitt's been out there as well. Both of them know that instinctively, and that's where they've been campaigning the most.
So the campaign begins in earnest on Wednesday, tomorrow morning. Tell us what we're going to see this fall. Look into your crystal ball.
Yeah, we're going to see a lot of discussion of which party's best at governing. We're going to see, can the Republicans survive having had all these problems and lack of leadership within their own governor? Name me a Republican governor candidate in any race that's flaunting their endorsement by Governor Fallon. Nobody is. I mean, she has a level of toxicity that really, I think, in a lot of the mainstream media thought that it would be Donald Trump that would be hurting the Republicans. No, it's Mary Fallon. And I think a lot of them have asked her to please stay away so we can try to recover. The Democrats are resurgent. I mean, they got wiped out in 2010 under the age of Obama. Time and time again, they're down. Their party has dwindled down to, I think their Senate caucus can meet at the round booth at the IHOP and have everybody there. They have an opportunity to pick up some seats. Will they become the majority? I don't see anybody as saying that they have a path to the majority in the House or the Senate by November. But they will pick up some seats, and they will be able to claim victory if they can do that. If they can win the governor's office and still pick up House and Senate seats, regardless of losing everything else, which is a distinct possibility, that, in my opinion, is still a victory for Democrats.
So tonight we'll be doing coverage on News 9 in Tulsa. If you're listening to this, it will be News on 6. Do you recall who had the most viewers back in the primary, which television station?
Well, it was News 9 and News on 6, I think.
It might have been. That just might have happened.
You think it correlates with us being on there and that having the highest ratings?
It's because of you in spite of me. Okay. Bill Shapard, the CEO of Sooner Poll. Next podcast, we'll talk about corruption, but we're not going to talk about Alabama football today. Bill Shapard, the pride of Ole Miss, Oklahoman. He came back to us. We're so grateful. Bill Shapard, thanks so much. See you folks at the polls and tonight on News 9 on election coverage.
You're listening to the new media, the Mitchell Talks Network. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter @MitchellTalks.